Hello YouTube friends, Ben Ochart here with the 60-gallon cichlid tank. And I'm giving you that intro because somebody in the live stream said they missed that intro, so there you go, a little bit of nostalgia for you. So, but the purpose of today's video is not this tank actually. Today I'm going to talk with you about the pre-filter that was put onto the intake of the Fluval FX6 that is currently running on my 100-gallon tank. And so I also have intake filters or pre-filters on the two Sun 302 filters that are running on this tank as well. A couple sponge pre-filter covers there that help keep those canisters pretty clean. But let's take a look at what impact that large pre-filter had on the Fluval. Let's go ahead and crack it open and take a look. And one more thing, also on the live stream, somebody asked about this hat, these three crowns. What these three crowns, I believe, mean are three kingdoms that came together to create Sweden. And this hat was a gift from my son, my oldest son, who played baseball, the equivalent of Major League Baseball in Sweden for a summer. They won the national championship, the Lumberjacks. They won the national championship, and he was a pitcher, coach, and led the league in numerous categories. And today he is actually working with the Philadelphia Phillies in Major League Baseball, as well as a part ownership of what is called Driveline Baseball in Washington, which is dedicated to developing both pitchers and batters. Okay, so that's the story on the hat, and let's go ahead and get into the pre-filter. Thank you so much. I found that it works best if I rinse the pre-filter with each water change. So I just simply remove it from the pipe, from the tube coming into the tank, and go ahead and rinse it in tank water. I then cracked open the Fluval canister to take a look at what's going on inside. And usually after, I'd say 3 months, 4 months, you look at these outside sponges, and they're usually pretty black. These actually, and I'm not sure if you can tell in this lighting, but these are actually not in that bad a shape. The top one probably doesn't need anything done to it at all. It looks pretty good. The bottom one is a little darker than I would have expected. There's not much of a moam buildup on it, but I was surprised when I took up the piece of pinky floss that I keep at the top, where the water comes up and then down the middle to head back to the tank. It was pretty disgusting. And what this started to show me was that what this pre-filter is doing is that it's holding on to the bigger chunks of waste and then sending them in a sort of a pulverized or small particle. It's sending them into the canister. And so something like a pinky filter would be the thing that would really ultimately stop particles that size. So this certainly needed to be replaced, and I did. And I also went ahead and took the media in that top tray and gave it a rinse in tank water in the bucket to the right there, and went ahead and cut a fresh piece of pinky floss and rinsed it and put it up there to be sort of the final polish before the water runs over the bio media. I would, in looking at the condition of the inside of the Fluval and really understanding what's going on with that pre-filter, I would probably give that the whole process of pre-filtering with a Fluval, I would give it probably a 7 out of 10. And I'll tell you why a 7 and why not a 10. I would have expected the inside of the canister, including the some of the middle trays, to be even in more pristine shape than they were. But, in all fairness, it is a coarse pre-filter. This is some very inexpensive garden pumice that I use in the middle tray. And I gave that a rinse in some tank water. And You can see here the outside sponges on the middle tray are in pretty good shape. So I really don't think I need to do anything with those, where normally I would have probably had to take those out and rinse them. So I'm going to leave those alone, and that saves me a little bit of time. But I did rinse that pumice in tank water, and since I had it cracked open anyway, and in the bottom tray I actually have a little bit of crushed coral. This is just an old school trick to add minerals and a little buffering to the water. The water in Southern California is pretty hard already, but in most of my other tanks, I'm using a coral substrate that releases primarily calcium and magnesium into the water. And but in this tank, because I'm using just plain sand as a substrate, I don't have that extra buffering. So I go ahead and use a little bit of crushed coral in the bottom. The pinky floss at the bottom also was catching a lot of the fine particle detritus. You can see it came out fairly dark, and so I went ahead and replaced that pinky floss, which is the final polish I give the water before it heads back to the tank. The sponges you can see here on the bottom tray are usually black, completely black and tar-like, and you can see they're not really in that bad a shape. There isn't much buildup or moam or any kind of goop around there. But since I've got the canister cracked, I'm going to go ahead and pull those out and rinse them anyway. And one of the real tests of what was going on in the canister, of course, is when you pour water out. This is the water I poured out of the canister in preparation to water some plants with it. And you can see that's not bad. Usually when I pour water out of a canister, it is like mud. So not bad at all. So I put the canister back together, and I put the pre-filter back onto the intake, and went ahead and put the lid back on and got everything good to go. And so overall, I'm thinking, a 7 out of 10. It wasn't entirely pristine inside, but they pull pretty hard. When I do water changes, by the way, I take this algae scrubber off the wall, and you can see it turns into a big party. The pleco works on the wall, and of course we'll come over to the algae scrubber, and the fish just feast on that algae. So it's a pretty good little product because it removes, it lowers nitrates, consumes nitrates. The algae eats the nitrate, of course. It releases oxygen, and it also provides a nice little treat for the fish. So one of the reasons why I'm a big advocate of these algae scrubbers, and I was pretty lucky because Santa Monica Filtration sent me a couple of them so I could do a review. So I got a pretty good deal on them. They're pretty expensive, no doubt about that. Nothing really pushes water like a nicely serviced Fluval, FX6. You can see how much water that thing's pushing. So overall, I'd say it was worth it. And using the 60-gallon as a backdrop here, I just want to share my final thoughts on it. It's interesting because when I crack open the Sun 302s with their pre-filter, those canisters are pretty pristine inside, and maybe I'll make a video about that later. But those don't pull quite as hard as the Fluval does. Of course, they don't move anywhere near. I don't know. Maybe they move 200 gallons versus 500 gallons per hour. So the Fluval is pulling a lot harder, and the pre-filter sponges on the intakes of the Sun 302s are a finer sponge. So maybe that may have something to do with it, the combination of being a finer sponge and not pulling quite as hard. It's not pulling in the more of the detritus is remaining on the sponge and then able to be rinsed off when I service when I do water changes and rinse the sponges. Whereas the Fluval is turning what gets caught on that pre-filter into a very, very fine particle, and then pulling it into pulling it into the canister where it is, captured primarily by the finer filter, the finer filter product, in this case, Pinky Floss, which is at the very top and at the very bottom of the center of the Fluval FX6. So perhaps a finer pre-filter would fine-tune or dial it in a little better, or maybe using it on a canister that doesn't quite as hard with so much force or strength as the Fluval FX6. And so at any rate, it is, I feel overall, 7 out of 10. I'm glad it's on there, and it certainly made this maintenance cycle on the Fluval a bit easier and a bit faster. And those are my thoughts. I certainly am interested in your take on this process. In particular, if you're using a pre-filter on one of your tanks, please comment below what your setup is, what kind of a filter are you pre-filtering, and overall what your thoughts are on using a pre-filter. Okay, so that's it for me, and I really do appreciate you tuning in. Be sure to hit that sub button if you haven't already. Hit that bell, become part of the Convo Gang. I love reading the conversations that take place at the bottom and participating in them, but I also get quite a kick out of watching the conversations that you folks get into with each other. Remember, we all learn from each other on this channel, and I really thank you for stopping by.